Hello and happy International Women's Day. I'm Alice Rawsthorne, co-founder of Design Emergency with my friend Paola Antonelli. And hello, Paola.
Hi, Alice.
One of our favourite episodes of Design Emergency every year is this one, our International Women's Day special, in which we celebrate some of the incredible women designers who, despite their achievements, haven't been given the recognition they deserve. As well as paying tribute to them, we'll explore why, despite their talent, intelligence, skills and sensitivity, these women have been unfairly forgotten or marginalised. Misogyny is, of course, the obvious explanation, but many of them have also faced challenges due to their ethnicity, geography, sexuality, faiths, and other factors. And at this turbulent time when we urgently need the best possible designers to address our increasingly complex problems, we'll all suffer if these prejudices continue. So, Paola, over to you and your first hidden heroine.
Amen, my friend. Well said. And I'm going to start with Sarah Elizabeth Good, our first hidden heroine of design. Sarah was one of the first African-American women to receive a U.S. patent on July 14, 1885, for what she described as a folding cabinet bed. Sarah was born into slavery in Toledo, Ohio in 1855 as Sarah Elizabeth Jacobs. But after the Civil War, which, by the way, for non-U.S. friends, ended in 1865, she moved to Chicago, where she in time married Archibald Archie Good, a carpenter and upholsterer. And together they operated a furniture store that served a largely working-class clientele. Many of their customers lived in small apartments and boarding houses where space was very limited, so the problem was practical: how to make a single room function as both living and sleeping space. And Good's solution was not the stacked bunk bed familiar today, but rather a vertically folding bed integrated into a cabinet. So when closed, the structure functioned as a writing desk with storage compartments, and when open, it became a full-length bed supported by a system of hinges and counterbalancing mechanisms. The design included additional shelves and compartments arranged so that the bedding could be stored neatly inside the unit, and the object really addressed urban density, domestic efficiency, and furniture multifunctionality, concerns that would become central to 20th century design. The patent drawings show a carefully engineered piece: a cabinet body, a folding frame, support system designed to maintain stability whether upright or deployed. And Good's invention really anticipated later developments in space-saving furniture, including the Murphy bed, which was invented 15 years later, and other modular transformable system. But what distinguishes her contribution also is not only the mechanism, but the context. A Black woman entrepreneur in the 1880s securing intellectual property protection in a system that rarely recognized African-American inventors, or women for that matter. So little documentation survives about her later life. We know that she continued to operate her business in Chicago until her death in 1905, and no known examples, unfortunately, exist of her original cabinet. Only the patent survives. But for a podcast focused on hidden heroines, Good is a perfect case. A woman inventor responding directly to social conditions such as post-Civil War migration, urban crowding, limited domestic space, and translating those pressures into an exquisite design solution.
What a wonderful story. Do we know whether the bed sold particularly well?
The bed sold really well, it seems, from the few records that existed, and then there were several iterations after the original patent. Unfortunately, there's none that exists in reality, which is really such a pity.
But the achievement for a Black woman at that time of getting a patent was absolutely incredible. Well, on to a very different example of another group of courageous and visionary women who developed a brilliant design solution to a very practical problem, though of a different type. It's the Fogelstad School of Women's Citizenship in rural Sweden, and it ran from 1925 until 1954, and was designed and run by women to enable other women from every strand of Swedish society to become responsible citizens. It was founded by 5 highly intelligent and accomplished women who'd led the Swedish campaign for female voting rights, and they were Honorine Hermelin, Kerstin Hesselgren, Ada Nielsen, Elizabeth Tam, and Ellen Wagner. They won the battle for voting rights in 1921, when Sweden became the last Nordic country to enfranchise women. But they soon realised that many Swedish women didn't have the knowledge or information they needed to make the most of their hard-won rights. So they opened a school in Fogelstedt Manor, a historic country house inherited by Tam, where women from diverse backgrounds could learn about and discuss crucial issues like citizenship, democracy, ecology, working rights, and pacifism. Students also participated in music, dancing, gymnastics and role-playing, and were offered public speaking classes to help them to champion their chosen causes after they left the school. So, for example, if they were equal pay campaigners or activists for free childcare, they would have the tools and skills they needed to advance those causes. And they even changed the seating plan at every meal so the women could get to know one another, specifically get to know women from very different demographics with very different lives, so they'd become much more sensitive to their circumstances. And several thousand women attended the school over the years. Many of them went on to become active citizens, locally and nationally. Some of them even ended up in the Swedish parliament. And together they helped to establish Sweden as a thriving democracy with a robust welfare state. At a time like the present, when democracy is under attack in so many places across our planet, inspiring strategic design initiatives like the Fogelstedt School are urgently needed today.
And this is so ripe for a movie. And it should be Sarah Polley directing it. Oh, mine. It's so moving to hear about this. So I'm going to now go to the other side of the world, to Latin America, and to Peru, actually, to talk about Elena Isque and also her sister Victoria. And I wanted to say something, when I mentioned that we were going to feature Elena Isque, a colleague of mine who's Argentinian started jumping with glee. And it's interesting because sometimes when we talk about these heroines, they might be known in different regions of the world, but they have not yet achieved global recognition. So in a way, in a very Euro and Western-centric kind of attitude, but we try to bring them to the fore. And Elena Isque is one of these particular cases. So she's often remembered as the textile designers who brought pre-Columbian motifs into modern fashion and decorative arts. And indeed, she translated archaeological forms into modern design language for textiles, for prints, for interiors, for exhibition environments. And her work predates many later appropriations of indigenous visual systems into modernist design and remains foundational to 20th century Latin American design history. And this is all accurate, but incomplete, because her work was inseparable from a pedagogical project that she developed with her sister Victoria. And while Elena later gained stronger individual recognition, particularly through a 1937 Paris Expo commission, Victoria's role in developing the visual grammar was incredibly important. Let's go back to Elena. She graduated in 1919 from the National School of Fine Arts of Peru, receiving the Medal of Honor. I could not find information about Victoria's schooling, but in 1926, at a time when Peru was undergoing an intense revaluation of national identity, the sisters together published a 2-volume Peruvian Art in Schools, a manual intended for national drawing education. The books analyzed and reorganized pre-Hispanic motifs into teachable graphic systems, repeatable forms, modular compositions, stylized figures suitable for classroom instruction, and grounded Peruvian visual culture in indigenous sources. The publication led progressive president Augusto Leguía to grant the sisters a scholarship to Paris, and there Elena studied at the Académie de la Grande Chaumière and attended workshops with Fernand Léger. She learned lithography, linocut, wood engraving, and then started applying these techniques to textile production. Using silk and wool, hand-printed and stylized forms, she developed fabrics that were both modern and historically grounded, and her scarves were acquired by the celebrated couture house of Worth in Paris. In 1935, the sisters exhibited also in New York, presented modern works alongside pre-Incan textiles and ceramics. And in 1937, as I mentioned before, Elena was commissioned to decorate the Peruvian pavilion at the International Expo of Art and Technology in Paris. And when she returned to Peru in 1939, she cemented her influence on Peruvian culture by becoming the director of the National Workshop of Applied Graphic Arts, where she focused on developing artisanal production, including straw weaving traditions from the northern part of the country. So Elena's work constitutes much more than textile design or crafts. Together with Victoria, they really worked on a systematic effort to convert pre-colonial heritage into modern visual education, into applied arts production, and in national design language.
Well, another amazing story. And of course, this is a time when so many designers, quite rightly, and we've spoken to a lot of them on Design Emergency, are very focused on developing singular design languages for their communities, their countries, and drawing on ancient and indigenous traditions to do so. So it's wonderful to think that a century ago, patriotic Peruvians like the sisters were conducting a similar campaign, and with such success.
It was all over the world, because also we'll get to some other proud, I wouldn't say nationalists, because it's not really only nationalism. It's about finding roots as a way to move forward. And it's very interesting. You're right. Many contemporary designers are doing the same.
So, staying in Latin America, but moving from Peru to Brazil, and the work of Rosa Grena Kliass, who was the first woman to be registered to practice as a landscape architect there. She was born in São Roque, a city in the Sao Paulo region, in 1932, but her family moved to the city of Sao Paulo for her secondary education in 1944. She attended university there as one of the very few women to study architecture in Brazil at the time. And during her final year, landscape design was added to the course, and she became fascinated by it, particularly after meeting the great Brazilian plantsman and landscape architect Roberto Belmarx while on a work placement. Kliass shared his passion for designing a definitively Brazilian approach to landscapes by using indigenous plants and trees, a very nice parallel to the Peruvian sisters, rather than continuing to import European species, as Brazilians had done in the colonial era. She also applied similar principles to her practice, but used her own interpretation of them, honed on a research trip to the US in the 1960s. And her work includes major public projects such as Lago dos Mendes in her hometown São Roque, the airports in Brasilia and Belém, and transforming a huge former prison complex in São Paulo into a really extraordinary, very beautiful public park. She also recognised the importance of raising awareness among local and national politicians about the potential of landscaping and greenery to transform the quality of the life of all citizens, particularly those living in precarious circumstances, in cramped accommodation, difficult conditions with small children, to have green spaces that they could really enjoy. Among her successors was to advise various government departments on landscaping and urban planning. She also persuaded the mayor of São Paulo to establish a Department of Parks and Green Areas, and she founded and chaired the Brazilian Association of Landscape Architects. She was a very discreet and diplomatic woman, and Rosa Grena Kliass marshalled those qualities to have a huge impact on the lives of millions of fellow Brazilians, yet she remains a hidden heroine internationally.
Landscape design is so quintessentially fundamental to the identity of Brazilian architecture and design. So it's amazing that she was the founder of the Institute of Landscape Design. And also, I'm thinking, looking at her work and listening to you speak also helps us perhaps understand that elusive and irritating concept that is like tropical modernism, right? So super interesting. Thank you for bringing her into our focus. So I'm going to go back to the United States now, and I'm going to go back to 1937 when Leona Chalmers received a US patent for what she called a catamenial device. So very weird, but so catamenial means in ancient Greek a monthly device. There was, in other words, a reusable menstrual cup, 1937. And she would secure a second patent in 1940 after she had refined the design. At a time when menstruation was cloaked in euphemism and silence, she approached the matter directly as a question of engineering. But engineer she was not, and neither a physician. She was an actress and writer. Her interest was very practical. Disposable menstrual pads were available in the 1930s, but they were bulky, expensive over time, and often uncomfortable. An internal device much worse. Tampons and IUDs of sorts existed, but they were rigid and very difficult to use. So Chalmers proposed a reusable flexible receptacle designed to collect menstrual fluid rather than absorb it. And her 1937 patent describes a cup made of soft rubber shaped to conform to the vaginal canal and held in place by the body itself. The design reduced odor, leakage, irritation, could be removed, emptied, washed, reused. The product was marketed under the name tassette, little cup, but it did not succeed commercially. And during World War II, rubber shortages constrained production even further. And more significantly, social norms surrounding menstruation discouraged open marketing. The culture was not ready, and it hasn't been ready until very recently, as a matter of fact. Yet the concept endured. Today's menstrual cups, typically made of medical-grade silicone, follow the same principle functionally that Chalmers patented nearly 90 years ago. And in the past decade, interest has surged globally because of rising environmental awareness, concern about the cost of disposable product, and greater openness in public conversation about menstrual health. Responsible millennials, may the heavens bless them, adopted it with abandon. And reusability, once a liability in marketing terms, was for them an advantage. A single cup can replace thousands of pads or tampons over its lifespan. Chalmers' idea eliminates waste, reduces recurring costs, and minimizes dependency on disposable products, all principles that align with contemporary sustainability concerns. Contemporary brands rarely foreground Chalmers' name, but the lineage is clear. Her patents established the technical foundation for a product that now circulates widely across markets and cultures. What distinguished Chalmers is that she framed menstruation as a design problem. And instead of improving absorbent materials and pre-existing solutions, she rethought the whole system.
Wow, it is such a toxic combination of misogyny that products that 50% of the global population can't necessarily use, because of course a large chunk of that 50% have never had access to commercial menstrual products, but certainly potentially could use. But also commercial interests are at bay. There are very powerful multinational companies that make fortunes from selling menstrual products. It is absolutely not in their interest that a large percentage of their customers switch to, as you say, sustainable, durable, and ecologically savvier and more responsible products like cups.
You're so right. And, the fact that it took so long for these issues to even be discussed publicly, and I think there's still some discomfort about them, is just unconscionable. But we have ways to go still.
We do. I mean, for example, my mother, who was very on it in most respects, so much more progressive than most women her age, would never have said the word menstruation or period. She would refer to my visitor, which sounded very sinister to me.
I agree.
So, well, moving on to a completely different area of design, and to one of my personal hidden heroines, I have always been baffled as to why this woman hasn't been hailed more often as one of the most influential fashion designers of the 1960s. And she is Michele Rosier, the French designer who founded a fashion label, V2V Sportswear, in Paris in 1962, after a brief media career as a journalist for the newspaper François and the editor of Nouveau Féminin magazine. For the next 10 years, she unveiled a succession of ready-to-wear collections in which she experimented with the use of vinyl, metallics, and other unconventional fabrics in mini dresses and boiler suits, all in gloriously deep, rich colours. She created a fun but sophisticated version of the mod look in London and Paris, and by doing so she presaged the futuristic styling of the most adventurous haute couture collections of André Courrèges, Paco Rabanne, and even Yves Saint Laurent. Many of the innovations that those men are credited with, they actually owe to Michele Rosier. Her looks were sporty, seductive, future-facing, and you may have gathered I've always loved this strand of fashion. And they were impeccably styled, as we would expect of the daughter of one of the most powerful women in late 20th century French fashion, her mother, Hélène Gordon-Lazareff, who founded Elle magazine during Rosier's teens. But by 1972, Michele Rosier was bored of fashion. She closed her label to focus on forging a new career as an independent filmmaker and documentary maker, and she directed, scripted, and in some cases produced over a dozen films and TV documentaries until her death in 2017.
Well, for anybody who's listening here, she's also ready for a comeback. I think that her collections, I was looking at her work when you told me that you would speak about her. And, I don't have your physique, but boy, would I also wear it if I could.
Oh, the clothes are fantastic. I was trying to think of reasons as to why she wasn't given more attention, particularly given that she was very well connected and supported within the French fashion hierarchy. And it's really not clear. It's partly, I think, because she was a pioneering ready-to-wear designer at a time when haute couture, really up until the very late 1960s, was supposedly paramount in setting trends. And she was aimed squarely at a very young, very chic, very hip market, rather than having broader commercial appeal.
But then at the same time, Mary Quant in the UK was instead more well-known, right?
Well known in the UK, but somewhat overrated in terms of her exaggerated pioneering impact on fashion. So a lot of the innovations that are credited to Mary Quant in the UK, really Michele Rosier had pioneered well in advance. But I think her looks were just, they were wholly uncompromising. Mary Quant's were probably more wearable, more commercially viable, and the same can doubtless be said of other ready-to-wear designers.
I love to listen to you talk about fashion. And, I'm going to move not to costume, not fashion. I'm going to talk about a titan of costume design that deserves to be much better known. And that's Banu Attaya. I'm going to India. She was India's first Academy Award winner and one of the most consequential costume designers in 20th century cinema. So she won in 1983 for Best Costume Design for Gandhi, the Attenborough movie. And she shared it with British designer John Mollo, who, by the way, little tasty factoid for sci-fi buffs, also had designed costumes for Star Wars, but that doesn't really matter. Let's go back. The award recognized not only a single film, but decades of work shaping visual identity in Indian cinema that she had accomplished. So to understand Attaya's significance, it is necessary to understand the scale and cultural force of Indian cinema in the decades after independence in 1947. By the 1950s, India had become one of the largest film-producing countries in the world. Hindi-language cinema produced in Mumbai, often referred to internationally as Bollywood, was already a mass medium shaping fashion, speech, music, and ideas of modernity across the subcontinent and its diaspora. Attaya entered the industry at a formative moment. She was trained at the Sir J.J. School of Art in Mumbai and associated with the Progressive Artists Group, a circle that sought to define a modern Indian visual language after independence. And she brought a modernist visual discipline to film costume. Her early collaborations with Guru Dutt were especially consequential. Guru Dutt is widely regarded as one of the most important auteurs of Indian cinema, and the films that he either produced or directed or starred in, or all of the above, include Pyasa from 1957, there was a romantic story, and Chodvin Kachand from 1960, and they're now considered classics for their visual composition, for their social critique, and their emotional depth. And costume did a lot for it. Ataya also worked with Dutt on CID, which is Criminal Investigation Department. It's like an acronym for that. It's a crime thriller from 1956 that he produced and that helped consolidate Mumbai's urban noir aesthetic. And these films shaped the visual grammar of Hindi cinema. How the modern city looked, how desire and disillusionment were dressed, how class and aspiration were signaled through clothing. Costume was central to all that. And Ataya's work articulated distinctions very subtly between rural and urban identities, between castes and classes, between wealth and precarity, between tradition and cosmopolitanism, all of these dualisms that were central to India at that time, and some of them still exist. Her contribution was therefore embedded in what is now globally labeled Bollywood, though that term gained international currency later. And it is not disrespectful to associate her with Hindi commercial cinema. She worked at its core. At the same time, her practice exceeded spectacle. She approached costume as historical and social research. So for Gandhi, working with Richard Attenborough, she oversaw thousands of garments for thousands of extras across multiple periods of Indian history, ensuring regional and historical and material accuracy and authenticity. Ataya supervised the sourcing, the dyeing, the fabrication of garments consistent with late 19th and early 20th century India, and the design strategy was very restrained. Khadi fabrics, and khadi is the hand-spun, hand-woven cloth that under Gandhi became a political symbol. Regional dress distinctions, subtle aging techniques. She really conveyed all the subtlety and the grandeur of India at that time. The scale of production reflected cinema's mass reach, and millions would encounter these images as history. In mid-20th century India, film was a primary public medium in a linguistically and regionally diverse country. And over her career, Ataya designed costumes for more than 100 films, collaborating with major and minor and hidden and independent and official directors across Hindi cinema. Her work helped define the visual codes of modern Indian identity, and her costumes became part of how audiences all over the world imagine modern India.
Well, a fantastic story and an extraordinary woman and a very worthy hidden heroine. Now, I'm going to end with the story of our final hidden heroine for International Women's Day 2026, who's also an Indian designer, but one who operates in a very, very different context to Bollywood and Hollywood. And she is Madhu Sarin, an architect and urban planner who has focused her work on improving the lives of India's most economically deprived and vulnerable citizens, both in urban slums and remote forests. She herself was born to a wealthy family in Chandigarh in 1945, and she was determined to avoid the conventional fate of women of her demographic of marrying a man from a similarly privileged background, and persuaded her parents to allow her to study at the Chandigarh College of Architecture instead. She was one of only 2 female students in her year, and yet, huzzah, she graduated top of her class. Sarin then continued her studies in Italy and the UK, where she became increasingly concerned about how planned environments like Chandigarh excluded the poorest and most fragile residents. She continued this research after returning to India by advising on the preservation of Chandigarh's architectural heritage, those incredible Le Corbusier and Edouard Jeanneret buildings, but also addressed the urgent need to support remote forest dwellers, particularly women in indigenous communities, as a member of the Campaign for Survival and Dignity. One of her solutions was to redesign the chulas, the traditional stoves made from mud on which many of those women cook. Intelligent, sensitive, pragmatic and determined, Madhu Sarin's work is a model of thoughtful and nurturing humanitarian design. I'm fascinated by her and I would love to learn more about her, but I found it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to find any information about her recent work. So if you have any information to share, please message me on Instagram.
I love that you're making that call, because it's important to find out more. And it's true. Sometimes, more information is not published or not available in a language that we can understand. But I would love to know more too, because the redesign of the chula, for instance, is so central to not only Indian way of living, but all over the world, because like cooking at home on usually a rammed earth stove is something that happens in many different countries. So
Exactly. I mean, the great Pakistani architect, Yasmin Lari, for example, has initiated sort of skills workshops for women across Pakistan to design and make their own chulas. So it's a formidable thing to do.
So thank you. And I'm going to close by reminding you all that this is Design Emergency, and you have just heard an episode on hidden heroines of design that Alice and I record every year to celebrate International Women's Day. What holds together this episode is range, if you think about it. We moved from domestic furniture to textile systems, from menstrual health to cinematic costume, from civic education to landscape architecture, from the intimate scale of the body to a territorial scale. And several of the women that we spoke about worked in industries where authorship dissolves, film, fashion, landscape, education, community planning, while others address subjects that are long considered marginal to serious design, like menstruation, domestic space, rural craft, women's political training. But in each case that we spoke about, the work was structural and it went far beyond what women's do and how they live. This is one of our favorite episodes of the year. And remember, you can find images related to this on our Instagram feed at design.emergency. And you can also explore our archives for more conversations with designers, architects, and others working to design a better world for all humans, all species, all planets. And I hug my friend Alice here. Bye, Alice.
Bye-bye, and happy International Women's Day.
And goodbye to you all.